You better go out and buy stock now. Let me tell you, this country will be like a rocket ship that goes straight up. This is going to be numbers that nobody's ever seen before.
Well, folks, Trump just folded like a paper origami crane in his trade war against China. I have never seen Chinese top official beaming so brightly in front of a press conference. Hi, I'm Carl Zha. You're watching the Silk and Steel podcast, where we cover everything about China, news, politics, and culture. Last week, before the US-China trade talks started, things were looking pretty bleak in the US. This is the director of Port of Los Angeles 2 weeks ago.
You're really expecting a third of the traffic to drop off next week?
Good morning, Becky. And yes, that's right. According to our own Port Optimizer, which measures the loadings in Asia, will be down just a little bit over 35% next week compared to last year. And it's a precipitous drop in volume, with a number of major American retailers stopping all shipments from China based on the tariffs.
Yeah, the China piece of that is the most interesting. That's where the shipments are basically ground to a halt, you've said?
Yes, that's correct. And that makes up about 45% of our business here in Los Angeles, Becky. Now, what we have heard in talking directly to CEOs and senior executives of the shipping lines is they'll try to add a couple of port calls in along the Southeast Asia routes where cargo is still moving, albeit at a 10% tariff. But realistically speaking, until some accord or framework can be reached with China, the volume coming out of there, save a couple of different commodities, will be very light at best.
I was looking at the numbers, and for the first 3 months, you all handled about 2.5 million import containers. That's up 14% year over year. So how much of that was retailers and others trying to really bring forward as much as they possibly could ahead of these tariffs?
A great majority of that volume was advancing inventory, and that started last summertime. Even during the campaign trail, when folks started talking about tariffs and trade policies, some larger retailers across a variety of sectors and manufacturing folks who were bringing in parts and components started to advance that inventory. So we had about 9 months of a run up here. And then this last burst in March really took us to the end of what we call that inventory look. And now precipitous drop overall. And realistically, what we're going to see next is that retailers have about 5 to 7 weeks of full inventories left, and then the choices will lessen.
And this is Port of Seattle last week.
Over my shoulder here, I'm looking out at the Port of Seattle right now, and we currently have no container ships at berth. And that happens every once in a while in normal times, but it is pretty rare. And so to see it tonight is, I think, a stark reminder that the impacts of the tariffs have real implications. It means that we don't have longshore workers on the dock right now unloading merchandise. We don't have trains taking that merchandise to inland ports and all the way across the country to places like Des Moines, Iowa, and Chicago, Illinois. And that's hundreds of jobs right here in our region and across the country.
You have none at your port right now?
We currently do not have any container ships at port right now. That's correct.
And that's because just nothing is being shipped over? I mean, that's pretty remarkable.
Well, it is. It's pretty unusual. We do anticipate, I was looking at our schedule, we anticipate about 25 vessel calls between here and the port of Tacoma over the next 7 days. And keep in mind, we're not just importing from Asia or just China. We do have activity from all over the world, largely the Pacific Rim, but we are seeing a significant drop in container volume through our gateway.
You said this is rare. I mean, can you think of the last time that this happened, that you didn't have any of them coming in at your port?
Probably the height of the pandemic was the last time I saw it, before we really started to see the surge in cargo towards the end of the pandemic.
If you want your car repaired, you do almost every AutoZone, O'Reilly, Napa, 90% of the car components are all made in China. Okay, and those are all imported. So even if you want to make those here, okay, just to replace, like, take a brake disc, right? If you want to make brake discs and furnish the whole U.S. market, you need 35 factories. Okay, each one's $100 million. Okay, start making it, and then when you do make it here, oh, by the way, the price is double. So these are the things, to reindustrialize the U.S., it's got to be a plan, and it's got to happen over time. It can't just be, you can't just wish it into existence.
What looks likely, given the scope and scale of the tariffs, is that we will see certainly the risks to higher inflation, higher unemployment have increased. And
This is what Trump have to say about this.
I guess you're talking about this transition cost. How long should people expect that transition to last, Mr. President?
I can't tell you that. I can tell you that we're making a lot of money. We're doing great. Again, we're losing more than $5 billion a day. $5 billion a day. You don't talk about that. And right now, we're going to be at a point very soon where we're making money every day. Look,
how soon?
We were losing hundreds of billions of dollars with China. Now we're essentially not doing business with China. Therefore, we're saving hundreds of billions of dollars. Very simple.
You take me to my next question, which is...
When will you speak to President Xi of China?
That'll happen. I mean, look, right now, and I told you before, they're having tremendous difficulty because their factories are not doing business. They made $1 trillion with Biden, $1 trillion, even $1.1 trillion with Biden selling us stuff. Much of it we don't need. Somebody said, the shelves are going to be open. Well, maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30, and maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally. But we're not talking about something that we have to go out of our way. They have ships that are loaded up with stuff, much of which, not all of it, but much of which we don't need. And we have to make a fair deal. We've been ripped off by every country in the world, but China, I would say, is the leading one, the leading candidate for the chief ripper offer.
The other thing, too, is this reporter behind me was quite snarky the other day when President Trump talked about the girl having two dolls. And he said, well, what? President didn't take the question, but he said, what would you tell that girl? And I said, I would tell that young girl that you will have a better life than your parents, that you and your family, thanks to President Trump, can now be confident again that you will have a better life than your parents.
Gee, I wonder what little girls from Trump's supporting family would say about this. Let's take a time machine and travel back to, let's say, September 2024, just before the election.
What do you want him to do? What do you want him to say today?
I want him to lower prices and lower the taxes and make Barbies cheaper.
Make Barbies cheaper?
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. Have they gotten expensive?
Yeah, and Polly Pockets. All my favorite toys are so expensive.
So somehow, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent were able to track down the Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng's itinerary through Europe. And then he chased him all the way to Geneva.
Terry, thank you for joining us. Now, earlier today, you said that we hadn't had negotiations with China. Now you're 2 days away from getting on a plane. And I know you've been working around the clock, but what changed? What was the catalyst for this?
Well, Laura, we haven't had negotiations. And first, thanks for having me on the show. The world has been coming to the U.S., and China has been the missing piece. I was going to be in Switzerland to negotiate with the Swiss. Turns out the Chinese team is traveling through Europe, and they will be in Switzerland also. So we will meet on Saturday and Sunday. And look, we have shared interest that this isn't sustainable, as I said before, especially on the Chinese side. And 145%, 125% is the equivalent of an embargo. We don't want to decouple. What we want is fair trade.
But is there a strong chance that the current tariffs will be completely paused after this weekend's talks?
No chance. No chance. No way. No way.
Well, what will happen? Well, okay. So let's say they don't. Let's say they have a great meeting, and maybe a general understanding that we're going to talk again. We want to make progress. But the 145 stay in place, or is it moved down to what we heard today?
No. They come down to a human level, right? To a level where we do business. There are significant tariffs. The president is going to keep significant tariffs on trade with China. That is his objective. That's his expectation. That should be everybody's expectation. But 145% is decoupling. Let's not do business with each other. Let's bring it down to a level that he studied and he knows, right? Where did we come out with on Liberation Day?
We have the live leak of actual U.S.-China trade talks on Geneva.
Made a friend. 我不想跟这些傻逼在一起了，救我，救我 I think he likes that. I think he likes us.
Well, the results are in, folks.
In massive news this afternoon, China and the US issued a joint statement following their two-day meeting in Switzerland over the weekend, which effectively cut tariffs on Chinese goods imported to the United States to 30%, and tariffs on US goods imported to China to 10% for 90 days. Basically, China got everything they asked for. The extra 20% tariff on Chinese goods imported to the US comes from two separate tariffs Trump leveled against China at 10% a pop, one on February 4 and another on March 4. China retaliated with a 10% tariff against US imports to China, which also remains in place. But you may be asking, why is the fentanyl tariff still in place? The fentanyl issue in the United States is nothing to do with China. And you'd be 100% right. In fact, I detail that in my new book, The Woolmile Handbook, 20 Anti-China Lies Debunked, which is available worldwide on Amazon from May 15.
US and China have mutually agreed to roll back all the retaliatory tariffs starting from April 2nd, Liberation Day. That means both sides will keep 10% mutual tariff on each other for appearances. So US will keep 10% tariff on China. China keep 10% tariff on US. The Trump tariff on China before April 2nd, the so-called fentanyl tariff that was 20%, will remain in place. So we have United States placing 30% tariff on Chinese goods, and China placing 10% tariff on American goods. So American importers will have to pay 30% tariff on imported Chinese goods, and the Chinese importer of American goods will pay 10% tariff.
No. Answer the questions I asked, please. I only have 5 minutes. Who pays tariffs?
Sorry, well...
Who pays tariffs?
Sorry.
Mr. Secretary, please.
Excuse me.
The question is very simply, who pays tariffs, Mr. Chairman? I'd like him to answer that question. He wants to answer other questions.
Well, Congressman, if the exporters, they dislike tariffs so much, why wouldn't they, if I think what you're trying to get me to say...
Did you remember the question? I'm not sure you did. Who pays tariffs?
It's a very complicated question.
But China will also get to keep all the sanctions on US prior to April 2nd. So that means the rare earth restriction will stay in place. Some of the Trump supporters have already celebrated this as a big win. Remember this guy? He tweeted out back in April. He said, China will bend the knee by the end of this month. Bookmark this. Well, now it's May, and he is now celebrating this as a big Trump win. This is why I said what I said before. Trump should have caved much, much earlier, because no matter what he does, his base will always 100% support him and claim this as big victory. But some of my Twitter follower has pointed out Trump couldn't cave until this very moment because, Trump can only cave when China finally allowed his representative to meet with them in a neutral country. Well, the good news is it's still not too late to save the back-to-school sales. Hello, I'm Carl Zha, your host to the Silk and Steel podcast. Please leave in the comments below What do you think about this outcome? And what do you think the future of US-China trade relationship will be? And what you would like to see more on my channel. Until next time, bye-bye.